I'm Dr. Cécile Cosculuila. Welcome to this English grammar video on the English verb equation. So what is the English verb equation? Well, it is actually the answer to a question that all the students in English want to find an answer for, because all the students want to get their verb forms right, and that is not as easy as you might imagine in the first place, but it can become very easy if you understand how verb forms are created. And there is actually a very simple logic at the core of verb form creations, and this logic is the following. So first of all, every time we make a sentence, or at least most of the time, there's a verb in it that is conjugated. So we always follow, whether we know it or not, we always follow the same 6-step process. So the first step is, am I going to use the present or the past? VS or VED, we're going to use symbols to refer to the tools that can be used to give a form to a verb. So obviously we start with the infinitive, the verb base. So that could be, let's say, see, and then we decide whether we want to use the verb see with the operator VS, the present, or operator VED, the past. We need to make a choice between and choose one of these two tools or operators. So yes, we're going to say that the blue operators are compulsory. We always need to choose one of them anytime we put a verb in a sentence, and that verb is conjugated. The second step now is, do I use do plus V0 or do I not use it? So basically the green operator is the one that is used to create the different types of sentences, like interrogative sentences or negative sentences. And so this operator is obviously optional, so you may use it or you may not use it, or rather you may have to use it, and sometimes it's not necessary. At any rate, what we will call the green operator, do plus V0, is optional. And it is not compatible with the red operators that appear now. So the first one of the red operators is modal plus V0. So I can choose to use a modal in my verb phrase or verb group, or I can choose not to use a modal. So the question is, do I use modal plus V0 or do I not use this operator? And as you can see, we're using formulas in order to master the way these tools or operators are used. So we know that do is always followed by a verb base and infinitive, which we call V0. And we also know that anytime we use a modal, we need to use the verb base right after the modal. There is no other option, which makes things really easy because it's always the same. So the green and red operators are not compatible. You have to choose to use either the green one or the red ones, or one of the red ones. And so the first red operator is modal plus V0, and then the fourth question that we ask ourselves, whether consciously or unconsciously, because obviously that process is very much automatic. The fourth question is, do I use have plus VEN, the perfect, or not, or zero, right? And so this is the second of the red operators, and obviously the red operators, we're going to see that there are 4 of them. They all have to be used with the blue one, and they're all incompatible with do plus V0, the green operator. And so the fifth question now is, do I use B plus VING or not? In other words, do I use the be plus VING form or do I use the simple form? So, as you know, 0 is a mathematical symbol that is used in linguistics to refer to the absence of whatever we're talking about. So, in this case, the absence of be plus VING has a name and it's called the simple form. And we now reach the last question, number 6. Do I use be plus VEN or not? And as you can see, and as you probably know, whenever you conjugate be and add the past participle of a verb, so VEN is the past participle, if you add the past participle of the verb, you create the passive voice. So be plus VEN is the symbol of the passive voice, or the formula of the passive voice, the symbol rather, and we can choose to use it or not to use it. And when we do not use the passive voice, obviously we use the active voice, whose symbol is 0. So this is it. The verb equation, the English verb equation, is this series of 6 binary operations, and systematically, anytime we put a verb in a sentence, we ask ourselves, consciously or not, whether we use VS or VED, and we can actually choose not to use any other operator. So that would be VS and none of the other operators. Okay, so that would be the formula for instance, if I use the verb see and only VS as an operator, I could say he sees her, to take a really simple example. And okay. And yes, so as I said, the verb equation is really simple, and there are very few rules that we need to pay attention to in order to use it in a satisfactory manner. So we have already mentioned most of them. The first one is that we always need to choose either VS or VED. One of these two operators is always present as soon as a verb is conjugated. The second rule is that the green operator is optional, so you don't have to use it. And it's the same for all the red operators. You can choose to use, actually, you can choose one, it could be this one, you could choose one, you can use one or two, any two of these operators, or you can use 3 of them. I mean, you can choose to use any one of these 4 red operators, or you might choose any 2 or any 3 or even all 4 of them. Sorry, all 4 of them. And again, they're not compatible with do plus V0, so I think that's the next point that I have highlighted here. The green and red operators are mutually exclusive. And of course, the operators always appear in the same order, which makes things really easy, because you know you are always going to find have plus VEN, that is to say the perfect, before be plus VING. And if you want to use a modal, it's always going to come before the perfect. So it's always the same thing. And once you know that, it makes things really easy. The 6th point that I have highlighted here, we've already mentioned it too, so it's really easy. The green operator is usually the one that we use to make the different types of sentences, unless there is a red operator in the basic sentence, that is to say the positive declarative sentence. And as you already know, we need to choose either VS or VED. So let's say we choose VS, and then if I use do plus V0, I cannot use any of the red operators. Gosh. And vice versa. So if I choose not to use do plus V0, then I can very well not use any of the red operators. Or I can also choose to use, let me start again, to use 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of the red operators, sorry. And I hope it is clear enough to you that you can actually choose to use only this one with a blue one, obviously. Okay, so you could use only the perfect in the passive voice, for instance. Or you could use the past, the operator of the past, and then you could choose a modal and no perfect and the be plus ing form and the active voice. So all the choices are possible given that if you take into account the rules that are mentioned here, and which are, as you can see, really, really easy. So I think, the next point is that, as you can see, there are a number of V places here. We can see V in each of the symbols here, because they all function with a verb. But as soon as you have more than one operator, so if you have a blue operator and another one, you have a formula in which there are more than one V places. In that case, you need to know that there is only one verb in a verb phrase, that is to say in a verb group, and that the verb is always in the last V place in the formula. So we're going to see a few examples in a second, and I would just like to draw your attention now to the fact that when there are several V places to be filled, they are filled with the operator that follows in the equation. So let's take an example. For instance, we have here the Prime Minister does do interviews on the web. So is this the present? Is this the present or the past? Well, we can see this is the present. Sorry. Oops. So this is the present. And then we do have operator do plus V0. And we know that if we have the green one, we cannot have any of the red ones. So what we actually have here is two V places, as you can see, this one and also this one. So what we do is that we put the verb in the last V place. So the verb do here is going to be in the last V place, and the operator do plus V0 is going to be combined with VS, with the operator of the present. And that's how we get he does do, the verb base here, interviews on the web. And as I said before, do plus V0 is used to create the different types of sentences, which we can see here, because this is an emphatic sentence. And if we want to create an interrogative sentence, then I'll let you think about it. You know what the interrogative sentence is. You can pause the video to answer the question and find the answer before you hear me say that the interrogative sentence would be, does the Prime Minister do interviews on the web? Let's take another example. The shareholders discussed the future of the banks. In this case, what we have here is it the present or is it the past? Well, obviously discussed is the past, and then do we have do plus V0? No, we do not. And do we have any of the red operators? We don't either. So in this sentence, basically discussed is just the operator of the past. And yes, and so I hope you all saw the mistake that I made because I went too far with the highlighters, so let me correct that. So we have here the past, the operator of the past. There's no do plus V0, and as I said, there is none of the red operators either, okay? Which means that we do not have a modal, we do not have the perfect, and we do not have be plus V-ing, which means that we have the simple form. In the active voice, remember these two zeros do have a name, and the active voice is the one that we use all the time by default. And there is no name for the zeros here that correspond to the absence of modal plus V0 and half plus VEN, but there is a name for the absence of B plus VING, and as you know, it is the simple form, so this zero here is going to be especially important for us to understand language and linguistic facts. And so yes, and maybe to understand and to see very clearly that when we have VED plus the simple form, when we have these two operators, then the tense that is created with these two operators, the conjugation, but that's not a word that is very much used, but a tense is actually a combination of operators, and so when we combine operator VED with operator 0, meaning the simple form, we get a tense that is called the simple past, or the past simple, which is what we have here, right, in discussed. And then we know we want to create an interrogative sentence. So how do we do that? Well, actually, we know that if there is no operator in the positive declarative sentence, we need to use do plus V0. So let's do that. Let's use do plus V0 to ask the question, which will be, you have already guessed. Otherwise, please pause the video because it is really, really important to be proactive, focus, answer the questions. That's the best way to learn. And the positive interrogative sentence here is, did the shareholders discuss the future of the banks? And so as you know here, what we have is, let me highlight it for you. So we have VED and do plus V0, and of course when the green operator is used, there is no red operator. So as you can see, did is actually the past of do, and then that's the verb base, discuss, that follows, because it's always do plus V0, and obviously do cannot work on its own. It needs to be associated either with VS or with VED, sorry, and it's the same for all the red operators. They cannot work without VS or VED. Okay, yes, so maybe we could take an example with a modal. Do you remember what modals are? So again, I suggest you pause the video and write down an exhaustive list of modals. And once you have done that, look at this one. So here's an exhaustive list of modals, and as you can see it is important to memorize the symbol modal plus V0 and to make sure that you check you put the verb base after a modal anytime you use one. And modals, like all the other tools, cannot work on their own. They need to be associated either with operator VS or with operator VED. And so here's a list of all the modals associated with operator VS. So in the present, may, can, shall, will, must, need, and dare. And on the second line here, an exhaustive list, I should say, of operators, of modals, which are special type of operators associated with operator VED. So that's might, could, should, would. Make sure you pronounce them right. Must, need, and dare. And as you can see right away, that is striking. Will is a modal in the present, just as would is the same modal associated with the past. So that's an important point that needs to be dealt with more in depth. But for now, let's go on to another example. So an example with a modal. In this case, let's choose to use will. So they will discuss, let me put will with one color. So that's the modal. And the modal is in what tense, or in which, associated with which operator, I should say. Well, it is associated with VS, okay? And then we know that we need, after a modal, to always use a verb base or an infinitive. That's the same thing, and in this case we have discuss. Then when we want to create an interrogative sentence, how do we do that? Well, we only use the green operator to create the different types of sentences when there is not a red operator. In this case, there's a red operator. So let's use this red operator to create the interrogative sentence, the positive interrogative sentence. Did you find what this sentence is? Remember to pause the video if you need more time, because it's important that you find it yourself. And when you have, just look at the one that's on the screen. The question is, will the shareholders discuss the future of the banks? Okay, yes, so maybe to conclude, I should point out that the verb equation is very complete, and that when it comes to creating tenses, all the tenses that exist in English are created without do plus V0, which is used to create the different types of sentences. And there is no modal either in the tenses in English, because modals are tools that are used by the speaker to mention their opinion, and therefore they're not part of the basic tenses of English, and neither is the passive voice, right? So basically we are left with number one here, VS and VED, and also two red operators. And the combination of these three couples of operators is what enables us to create all the tenses that exist in English. But that will be the subject of another video, and for now I am just going to conclude that the English verb equation, as you can see, is really easy to master, and this series of 6 questions that we systematically ask ourselves, whether consciously or not, anytime we put a verb in a sentence, is the key to master your verb forms and produce exclusively verb forms that are correct. Yes, let us conclude. Yes, so when we use the verb equation, we come up with formulas, that is to say we choose to use some operators and not others, and so these different choices are what we call formulas, and we will look into that question in another video, actually in the next video, because yes, I wanted to conclude by pointing out that the subject of this video was the English Verb Equation, which is related to a book that I have been writing, and which is the first part of a triad, a logical triad of books, because in order to use the verb equation, you need to use verb formulas. So the second book is how to use verb formulas, and then you need to connect the tools that are used to give a form to a verb with the different forms that a verb can take, the different combinations that are possible. And the link between the two is actually the English verb matrix, and all these subjects will be dealt with in upcoming videos. For now, I guess we'll leave it at that. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope things are clearer now, and I wish you all the best. See you in the next video.